Ex-Nazi missile technician reveals secret facilities where female prisoners were harassed before tests, March 14, 1945. Mittelwerk, underground factory, Kohnstein Mountain, Thuringia. The tunnel breathes with mechanical rhythm, compressors exhaling, hydraulic lifts groaning, the metallic percussion of assembly work echoing through limestone chambers carved half a mile beneath the mountain. The air tastes of machine oil and human desperation, a bitter amalgam that clings to the back of the throat. Klaus Riedel stands in the shadow of a nearly complete V-2 rocket, its 46-foot length stretching toward the tunnel ceiling, its sleek geometry a monument to engineering ambition and slave labour. His hands, stained with hydraulic fluid and graphite dust, clutch a manila folder marked Geheimkommandosache, secret command matter. Inside are technical diagrams, yes, but also something else. Floor plans of auxiliary chambers adjacent to the main assembly tunnels, chambers that appear on no official schematic, spaces designated only by alphanumeric codes that Riedel has learned to recognize as markers of something beyond weapons production. He has requested this meeting with advancing American forces from the 104th Infantry Division, has waited 3 days for military intelligence officers to arrive, has carried this folder through the chaos of Germany's collapse because he understands that silence about what happened in those auxiliary chambers would make him more than complicit. It would make him accomplice to atrocities that occurred in the margins of technological achievement, hidden in the literal underground of the Third Reich's most ambitious weapons program. This is where innovation becomes contamination, where the pursuit of military technology creates spaces for systematic cruelty that exists not as aberration, but as structural feature of the system that built rockets to strike London while grinding human beings into expendable components of production. The story of secret facilities where female prisoners were harassed before forced participation in missile testing begins with the intersection of two Nazi obsessions, the V-weapons program and the concentration camp system. By late 1943, as Allied bombing devastated German industrial capacity and the Eastern Front consumed men and material at unsustainable rates, the Reich placed desperate faith in Vergeltungswaffen, vengeance weapons, particularly the V-2 rocket, the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. Production was relocated underground to protect it from aerial assault, concentrated primarily at the Mittelwerk facility, carved into Kohnstein Mountain near Nordhausen. The facility employed approximately 60,000 prisoners from the Mittelbau-Dora concentration camp system, working in conditions that killed an estimated 20,000 through exhaustion, starvation, and deliberate brutality. But within this documented horror existed another layer, one that Riedel's technical position gave him access to: auxiliary facilities where female prisoners, a small percentage of Mittelbau-Dora's population but present nonetheless, were subjected to systematic harassment before being forced to participate in weapons testing procedures that violated every principle of human dignity and scientific ethics. Klaus Riedel was 29 years old when he was assigned to Mittelwerk's telemetry section in October 1943. He had studied electrical engineering at the Technical University of Darmstadt, joined Werner von Braun's rocket development team at Peenemünde in 1941, and possessed expertise in guidance systems and instrumentation crucial to the V-2's development. He expected his wartime service would involve pure technical work, solving engineering problems, advancing rocket science, contributing to weapons development through mathematical precision and experimental rigor. What he actually experienced was immersion in a system where technical achievement was inextricable from slave labor and systematic abuse, where the pursuit of ballistic perfection occurred literally atop chambers where human beings were degraded as prelude to being used as test subjects in experiments that served not scientific inquiry, but sadistic curiosity masquerading as operational necessity. The historical record establishes that Mittelbau-Dora held approximately 32,000 prisoners at its peak, the vast majority male, Soviet POWs, political prisoners, Jews, resistance fighters from across occupied Europe. But the camp system also held approximately 800 women, initially used for surface construction work and later, as underground production expanded, for specific tasks including cable assembly, electrical component testing, and, in the program's final desperate months, participation in what SS administrators termed Funktionsprüfung unter Extrembedingungen, functionality testing under extreme conditions. This clinical language concealed a program in which prisoners, including women, were subjected to tests of guidance systems, pressure chambers, vibration equipment, and other experimental procedures that caused injury, psychological trauma, and in some documented cases, death. The auxiliary chambers that Riedel's floor plans documented were located in Tunnel 44, a side passage off the main V2 assembly tunnel, designated Tunnel B. Official Mittelwerk documentation lists Tunnel 44 as storage for testing equipment and experimental apparatus. Riedel's folder contained a more complete picture. Architectural drawings showing not storage but furnished spaces including what the plans labelled Vorbereitungsräume, preparation rooms, equipped with examination tables, restraint systems, decontamination showers, and monitoring equipment. These were not medical facilities designed for prisoner welfare. The equipment specifications, the spatial layout, the adjacency to chambers, housing pressure testing apparatus, and vibration tables, all of it revealed spaces designed to prepare prisoners, particularly women prisoners, for participation in weapons testing through procedures that began with systematic psychological and physical harassment intended to establish absolute compliance. One document in Riedel's folder, dated November 8, 1944, was a memorandum from SS Hauptsturmführer Otto Fürschner, Commandant of Mittelbau-Dora, to Dr. Kurt Debus, a V2 engineer responsible for launching operations. The memorandum discussed available test subjects for pressure chamber validation and noted that 17 female prisoners from the electrical assembly section have been selected for participation in decompression trials scheduled November 15, 22. Standard preparation protocols will be implemented November 12, 14 to ensure subject compliance and baseline psychological conditioning. The language was bureaucratic, clinical, treating human beings as experimental resources to be prepared through protocols that the memorandum did not specify, but that other documents in the folder made horrifyingly clear. A second document, a test log from December 1944, recorded what it termed vibration tolerance assessment, conducted with 6 female subjects, ages 19-34, political prisoners, Polish and Soviet nationality. The log noted that pre-test preparation in Tunnel 44, rooms 3-5, December 7-9. Established compliance through standard harassment protocols including isolation, thermal stress, and psychological disorientation procedures approved per SS Directive 744. The vibration tests themselves, ostensibly to validate missile component durability under launch stresses, involved strapping prisoners to equipment that subjected them to mechanical vibration at frequencies and intensities that caused documented injuries including internal bruising, joint damage, and in 2 cases noted in the log, hemorrhaging requiring medical intervention to prevent immediate death, though not for humanitarian reasons but to preserve test subject availability for subsequent trials. Riedel would later testify that he became aware of these auxiliary facilities and their purpose through his technical responsibilities. Telemetry equipment he was installing required electrical connections that ran through Tunnel 44. During installation work in January 1945, he observed the preparation rooms, saw the equipment they contained, encountered SS guards supervising what they referred to as Vorbereitung, preparation of female prisoners before testing procedures. He did not witness the full scope of what occurred in those rooms. Access was restricted to SS personnel and specific scientific staff, but he saw enough. Prisoners brought in looking exhausted but whole, emerging hours later visibly traumatized, often with signs of physical abuse, always in a state of psychological dissociation that Riedel recognized as deliberate conditioning to eliminate resistance before the actual weapons test began. The weapons testing itself was documented in Riedel's folder through multiple test logs. These were not the primary V2 test flights launched from Peenemünde or later from mobile launchers. Those tests used telemetry and mathematical modelling, not human subjects. These were auxiliary experiments, conducted underground in Mittelwerk's testing chambers, ostensibly to validate specific subsystems, but actually serving darker purposes that mixed sadistic curiosity with the SS's ideological conviction that prisoners were suitable subjects for any procedure deemed operationally useful. Pressure chamber tests that subjected prisoners to rapid decompression cycles mimicking high-altitude exposure. Thermal stress tests placing prisoners in chambers heated to 45 degrees Celsius or cooled to near freezing. Vibration tests, centrifuge tests inducing G-forces that caused loss of consciousness. These procedures caused documented harm. The test logs recorded injuries, medical interventions, psychological deterioration. In at least 4 cases documented in the logs Riedel preserved, female prisoners subjected to these tests died, their deaths attributed to physiological incompatibility with test parameters, or pre-existing medical conditions exacerbated by testing protocols. The emotional contrast is stark. Riedel expected rocket science, the clean mathematics of trajectories, the elegant engineering of combustion chambers and guidance systems, the intellectual satisfaction of solving complex technical problems in service of his nation's war effort. What he actually experienced was the contamination of technology with atrocity, the realization that the rockets he helped perfect were assembled by slaves and tested through procedures that used human beings as expendable instrumentation. The transformation he underwent was gradual. Each glimpse into Tunnel 44, each test log he reviewed documenting prisoner injuries, each moment of understanding that his technical work existed within, and enabled a system of systematic cruelty, accumulating until by March 1945, with American forces approaching, the weight of complicit knowledge became unbearable. The symbolic object that recurs through this history is the test log itself, the bureaucratic documentation that Nazi technical programs generated obsessively, recording every procedure, every measurement, every outcome with meticulous precision. The logs were printed on standard forms, filled out in neat handwriting or typed with carbon copies, filed in binders organized by date and test series. They documented technical data, pressure readings, temperature measurements, vibration frequencies, alongside human data, subject identification numbers, observed physiological responses, injuries sustained, dispositions after testing. The logs treated prisoners as instruments, their suffering as data points, their deaths as technical failures of test subject durability, rather than murders committed under guise of scientific inquiry. But these same logs, preserved in Riedel's folder and in archives captured by Allied forces, became evidence, documentation that could not be denied because it was created by the perpetrators themselves, recorded with the same technical precision they applied to rocket performance data. The historical documentation preserved in multiple archives establishes the scope of this program. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum holds Mittelwerk test logs documenting at least 37 separate testing procedures involving female prisoners between August 1944 and March 1945. The German Federal Archives contain SS memoranda authorizing the use of prisoners for weapon system validation procedures and establishing protocols for their preparation in auxiliary facilities. British intelligence reports from interrogations of captured Mittelwerk personnel describe the auxiliary chambers in Tunnel 44 and their purpose, and survivor testimony, rare because few women subjected to these procedures survived both the testing and the subsequent death marches as camps were evacuated, corroborates the documentary evidence. One survivor, Zofia Posmis, a Polish political prisoner who was briefly held at Mittelbau-Dora before transfer to Ravensbrück, later described in a 1985 interview being selected for what guards termed Sonderaufgaben, special assignments, in January 1945. She was taken to Tunnel 44, held in a preparation room for 2 days, where she was subjected to alternating isolation, extreme cold, constant light, and verbal harassment by SS personnel who told her repeatedly that she would participate in testing that might kill her, but that compliance was her only option. They wanted us broken before we ever reached the testing equipment, she recalled. The harassment was systematic, designed to destroy any thought of resistance, to make us understand we were not human beings with rights, but objects to be used. I was fortunate. I was transferred before the actual testing occurred. Others were not so fortunate. The weapons testing program using prisoners as subjects violated the Hippocratic principle of medical ethics, violated the Geneva Convention's provisions protecting prisoners of war, violated every standard of scientific ethics that existed even in the 1940s. But it occurred within the legal framework the Nazi regime created for itself, where SS directives authorized procedures that served operational necessity, and where prisoners were classified as Schutzhäftlinge, protective custody inmates, without legal protections. The program existed in the intersection of a weapons development urgency, SS ideological conviction that prisoners were subhuman, and therefore suitable for any use, and the scientific community's willingness to accept data and test subjects without questioning their source or the ethics of their acquisition. Werner von Braun, the technical director of the V2 program, was aware of the use of concentration camp labour at Mittelwerk. This is documented through his visit records and correspondence. Whether he was aware of the specific testing program using prisoners as subjects remains debated. He claimed post-war ignorance, but documents suggest at minimum willful blindness, a choice not to know the full scope of what occurred in facilities he supervised. Other scientists and engineers at Mittelwerk made similar claims, that they focused on technical work and remained deliberately ignorant of how prisoners were treated or used. Riedel would testify that this willful ignorance was standard among technical staff. We told ourselves we were scientists, engineers, not SS guards. We focused on our technical responsibilities and did not ask questions about what happened in sections we did not directly work in. This was cowardice disguised as professional focus. When American forces captured Mittelwerk in April 1945, they found extensive documentation of the V2 program, thousands of technical drawings and test logs that would be seized as part of Operation Paperclip, the program that brought German rocket scientists to the United States. They also found the auxiliary chambers in Tunnel 44, found the preparation rooms and their equipment, found the test chambers with their restraint systems and monitoring apparatus. The discovery generated multiple intelligence reports, but the focus quickly shifted to the technical value of the V2 program, rather than the criminal means of its production and testing. Many Mittelwerk engineers, including some who had knowledge of or participation in prisoner testing programs, were recruited to American missile development efforts, their technical expertise deemed more valuable than their accountability for wartime conduct. Riedel was not among those recruited. His voluntary surrender of documentation detailing prisoner abuse made him useful as a witness, but unsuitable for rehabilitation into American weapons programs. He testified at the Dora trial in 1947, where 19 Mittelbau-Dora personnel were prosecuted for war crimes. His testimony helped establish the systematic nature of prisoner abuse, the existence of the auxiliary testing program, and the deliberate harassment protocols implemented in the preparation chambers. 15 defendants were convicted, including 4 who received death sentences that were carried out in 1948. But most engineers and scientists associated with Mittelwerk faced no prosecution, protected by the calculation that their technical knowledge was needed for post-war military competition with the Soviet Union. After his trial testimony, Riedel returned to West Germany and worked as an electrical engineer for a manufacturing firm, deliberately avoiding aerospace work. He carried the folder, his copy of the documents he had surrendered to American authorities, for the rest of his life, moving it from apartment to apartment, city to city, eventually donating it to the German Federal Archives in 1982, 3 years before his death. The folder contained not just the floor plans and test logs, but also a handwritten letter, dated March 12, 1945, that Riedel had written but never sent. The letter was addressed to whom it may concern, and stated, "I am an engineer who believed technology was morally neutral, that mathematics and physics existed apart from ethics, that I could design guidance systems for rockets without moral responsibility for what those rockets destroyed or how they were produced. I was wrong. Technology built by slaves is contaminated. Testing conducted on prisoners is contaminated. Knowledge gained through torture is contaminated. I cannot undo my participation, but I can document it, preserve the evidence, ensure that what happened in Tunnel 44 is known. This is insufficient atonement, but it is what remains available to those of us who understood too late that engineering is never morally neutral, that every technical choice is also a moral choice, that there is no such thing as pure science when that science occurs within and enables systematic atrocity. The transformation this history documents is the collapse of the myth that technical work is ideologically neutral. Riedel and his colleagues believed they were engineers first, that their professional expertise could remain separate from the ethical implications of the system they served. They learned, some too late, some never, that this separation was illusion, that working on weapons produced by slaves made them participants in slavery, that using data from prisoner testing made them complicit in torture, that focusing on technical problems while deliberately ignoring where their work occurred and how it was enabled was moral failure disguised as professional discipline. The larger truth this history reveals is about the responsibility embedded in technical expertise. The V-2 rocket represented extraordinary engineering achievement, the first vehicle to reach space, the technological foundation for all subsequent rocketry and space exploration. But that achievement was inseparable from the 20,000 prisoners who died producing it, and the unknown number subjected to testing procedures that treated human beings as expendable components. The technical knowledge gained was real. The mathematical models were sound. The engineering solutions were elegant. But all of it was contaminated by the means of its acquisition, contaminated in ways that no amount of post-war rehabilitation could cleanse. The American abundance that forms the symbolic contrast in many WW2 tales appears here as absence. What was absent in the Nazi system was the foundational conviction that human dignity must constrain technical ambition, that no weapons program justifies treating people as experimental subjects, that engineering ethics require refusing participation in systems that grind human beings into components. The United States and its allies were not morally perfect. This history is complex and contains Allied failures and atrocities. But the systematic use of concentration camp prisoners as weapons test subjects, the architectural creation of harassment facilities to prepare women for experiments that caused injury and death, the bureaucratic documentation of human suffering as technical data, this reflected an ideological system that valued technological achievement over human life in ways that Allied systems, for all their flaws, did not institutionalize. The epilogue is this. The test logs remain in archives, available to researchers willing to confront what they document. The chambers in Tunnel 44 were sealed after the war, the mountain made off limits, later opened as a memorial site where visitors can walk through sections of Mittelwerk and see where V2s were assembled by slaves. The auxiliary chambers are not part of the public tour. They exist in restricted sections, preserved but not displayed, their equipment long since removed but their architectural features intact. The preparation rooms where women prisoners were systematically harassed before being forced into testing procedures still have the mounting points where examination tables once stood, the plumbing for the decontamination showers, the electrical conduits that powered the monitoring equipment. The spaces speak through their dimensions and infrastructure, testifying to purposes that cannot be explained away as necessary wartime measures or acceptable scientific inquiry. Klaus Riedel died in 1985 at age 71. He never married, never had children, lived quietly in a series of German industrial cities where his electrical engineering work had no connection to weapons or aerospace. The folder he preserved, now digitized and available through the Federal Archives, remains one of the most complete documentary sources for understanding the auxiliary testing program at Mittelwerk. His letter, the one he wrote but never sent, appears in the folder as the final document, his handwriting careful and precise even in confession and self-condemnation. It ends with a sentence that serves as epitaph. I solved technical problems with great competence and no moral courage, and this combination makes me responsible not just for what I did, but for what I enabled by doing it skillfully while asking no questions. The V2 rockets launched against London and Antwerp in 1944-1945 killed approximately 9,000 people, military and civilian, British, Belgian, French, American. The production of those rockets killed at least 20,000 concentration camp prisoners. The testing procedures documented in Riedel's folder killed or injured an unknown number. The logs he preserved document at least 4 deaths among female prisoners subjected to pressure chamber and vibration tests, but the incomplete records suggest this represents a fraction of the total casualties. These numbers do not include the psychological harm, the trauma of surviving harassment protocols and experimental procedures that treated human beings as instruments and suffering as data. In 2025, 80 years after American forces discovered Tunnel 44 and its auxiliary chambers, scholars of technology ethics, Holocaust studies and aerospace history continue to grapple with how to teach the V2 story, whether to emphasize the technical achievement or the human cost, whether the scientific knowledge gained retains value despite its contaminated acquisition, whether the engineers who created it while claiming ignorance of the system that enabled it deserve rehabilitation or condemnation. There are no comfortable answers. The technical achievement was real. The atrocity was real. Both are permanently bound together in the historical record, inseparable in ways that complicate simple narratives about technological progress. The test logs that Klaus Riedel preserved do not allow comfortable distance. They document specific women, prisoner numbers, ages, nationalities, subjected to specific procedures on specific dates with specific outcomes recorded in clinical language that cannot hide the suffering it catalogues. Reading them is confronting not abstract historical atrocity, but concrete harm inflicted on identifiable individuals in pursuit of weapons development goals that treated human life as expendable resource. The logs are evidence, but they are also memorial, the only record that many of these women existed, that they suffered, that they died not in the dramatic narratives of battle, but in the bureaucratic documentation of technical testing conducted in sealed chambers beneath a German mountain. The truth these documents teach is uncomfortable for anyone involved in technical fields, weapons development, or research that pushes ethical boundaries in service of military or scientific goals. That technical achievement does not justify inhumane means. That claiming ignorance of how research subjects were acquired or how data was gathered does not absolve responsibility. That competence increases rather than decreases moral culpability when that competence enables atrocity. Klaus Riedel was a skilled electrical engineer. That skill made him valuable to the V2 program. His choice to apply that skill while deliberately not questioning the system that produced test subjects or the procedures they endured was moral failure that no amount of technical precision could redeem. The limestone chambers of Mittelwerk are silent now, the machinery long removed, the assembly tunnels empty, the auxiliary chambers sealed. But the test logs speak, their data columns and clinical observations testifying to what occurs when technological ambition becomes unmoored from human dignity, when engineering excellence is placed in service of ideological evil, when the pursuit of weapons development treats human beings as acceptable casualties not just of war but of research. The V2 reached space, achieving velocities and altitudes that opened the path to the moon and beyond. But it rose on a foundation of slave labour and experimental subjects, and that foundation remains part of its story, contaminating its achievement in ways that 80 years of distance cannot cleanse. The rockets flew, the prisoners died. Both truths exist simultaneously, and acknowledging both is the minimum requirement for honest history.